Color is a massive part of the filmmaking process, and it is one of the many tools in your tool belt to tell your story. So how do you tell a story with color? I'm going to be using a couple of pro tools here, but these are concepts that you can apply in any program with any stage of knowledge of working with color. The program I'm going to be using is Dehancer. Now, if you want 10% off and if you want to follow along or you want to learn things about this program, it's super powerful and amazing. We have a link in the description for 10% off. Go check it out. But Dehancer, just to clarify, they have no control of this video. They sent us the link to try out the software, and that's what we're doing right here. It just so happened I was going to color grade a music video anyway. This is the perfect time for it. It was just kind of good timing, honestly. So naturally, we want to figure out what the story of this project is. And in a sense, it's basically about a zombie character who comes to life and is around a bunch of people that she doesn't like. It's just not a fun time for this zombie. But then this zombie gets saved by their friends and they get to go have adventures and play shows. And we end kind of at this emotional high for the music video. Color has a lot of different functions, and we'll kind of go over them once we get into the program, but in a sense, warm colors are associated with happiness, brightness is associated with happiness, blue colors and desaturation tends to be associated with sadness or with a negative emotion. So we are going to use that underlying understanding of what those emotions look like in color to inform what we do. So I'm going to open my project here. So the video starts with our, Frankenstein zombie character going down the road and ending up in a coffee shop where they're not super well received by everybody. But this frame is the one that I want to work on first, and you can kind of see there's some color already applied to it, but we're going to go into the color tab within DaVinci. We're going to start over. Now, this is typically how I build my node tree, which these are akin to your Lumetri color panels in Premiere. You're going to be doing an effect on each node, which ultimately will take the raw image, do something to it, manipulate it, and then that will create the final look of the piece. So we have our character, she's coming through the door, she's not having a great time. We're gonna do a couple of things. First one is we're gonna leave the first node blank because that is going to be our basic corrections. Usually on this node, all I like to do is white balance and contrast. So I'm gonna use this node to kind of just get us to square one, you know what I mean? But then we're gonna apply an effect called Dehancer. And it's gonna look really wonky at first because it's a computer program. It's trying to interpret whatever this thing is, all these ones and zeros. You have to tell it what it is. So we're gonna go over here, we're gonna say source. We're gonna actually choose our camera. This was shot on the Sony a7S III in S-Log3 Cine Gamut. So you can see we kind of end up in a basic place of contrast and color, but it is decisively warm. Now, luckily our character is wearing a white shirt. This is kind of a cheat code, which I love, honestly, and we're gonna go in and we're gonna select the white balance. So within Dehancer, you're gonna have a couple of different options. Besides choosing what camera, you're gonna be able to expose differently. You're gonna be able to adjust the temperature, which I don't like to do that here because there isn't a selector. You can adjust the temperature, you can adjust the tint. Defringe is essentially a sharpening asset. So I don't use defringe because I use film grain and a bunch of other things down the line to kind of set the look, but I'll show you in a second. So this is the film look is disabled. So this is essentially what we're getting as a Rec 709 image. So this is probably akin to what was seen on the screen while they were shooting. And then obviously we have our white balance that we did before. So this is kind of our starting point if you want to think about it that way. I ran through a bunch of different options with the director. So I pulled a bunch of stills so you can see the different variations here. So we landed on a film stock that's actually a photo film stock, but it's a Fuji Color Natura 1600. Now, a couple of different things to note about what that means. Fuji is the brand, Fuji Film. They make still photography film today, but they used to make motion picture film back in the day. Natura is the brand, or I guess like the model of the type of blend that they use for their film. And then 1600 is the sensitivity. So this was a very sensitive film stock. Most film stocks capped out at about 500. So the fact that it was 1600 means it was a very sensitive stock. It was meant for low light situations. But one of the things you do notice with this is it drops a lot of desaturation into the white of the shirt and the white of the background, as well as the dark of the door frame. There's basically no color there whatsoever. The thing I like about this is it makes the green and the red really pop off the screen. I'm not necessarily going to mess with film developer or film compression or expand or print, because all of those have to do with the type of film that was used to either copy the original negative or how it was projected. So we're going to move down to film grain. Now, film grain is obviously a hot button debate at this point, but I don't love a lot of film grain. But for this, as you can see, like I pull it up and it's pretty gnarly, but that's what it's doing ultimately in smaller patterns. But in this instance, it kind of feels like a 16 millimeter old, horror film from the 70s. That's kind of the look that we're going for at this point. So I am going to choose 16 millimeter. Important to know, the higher sensitivity of the film, the more grain it's going to have. Just naturally, it's just the way chemically that it works. So I like the 16 millimeter grain the most, but I am going to choose the 50 sensitivity 16 millimeter grain so that it is smaller and it's more fine across the layer. And I'm actually going to pull you see what it's doing here. It's very tightly packed and it doesn't disperse the color too much, but it definitely adds a layer of fuzz on top. But I am going to pull it down. You can kind of see what it's doing in the scopes. It's dropping the highlights and it's kind of decompressing everything, or it's decontrasting everything. So I'm going to pull it up from 0 to about, I really don't want a lot. I'm gonna pull it down to I feel like 5 is even too much. I'm gonna pull it to 2. I feel like that's enough. I feel like that does a pretty good job of what we want. Now, obviously, now that we kind of have our look dialed in, we're going to go back into the white balance and contrast node. And I am going to pull down overall, and I'm going to pull down the highlights. Part of this is because when you shoot on Sony, it's best to overexpose. As soon as you start bringing up the shadows, you start to introduce a lot of noise. And even though we're adding simulated noise, we really want to be able to control it. So as soon as you underexpose on Sony, you don't have any control over how noisy the whole thing is. There are plugins and effects that you can use to reduce the noise, but you can't, it's hard to do that and then add grain to it, because then it starts to break apart. The whole image starts to fall apart. So we got our contrast kind of where we want, pulled down the highlights, pulled down the global overall. You can kind of see what it's doing here. Obviously, massive color shift is happening. Then in Dehancer again, so we got film grain. We're going to look at a couple of different things. We're not going to use them, but we're going to look at them. Halation, which is an effect that happens in film where the highlights take on a little bit of color. And part of that is just the chemical remnants of how that film would develop pure white. Bloom is a little bit more akin to like a Pro Mist filter. You can see what it does here. It's pretty aggressive, and we're not going to use this right now because it doesn't fit the vibe, right? Again, we're trying to communicate story through our color. At this point in the story, she's not having a great time, right? The world is drab and dull, and we're going to actually enhance that here in a second. I do want to do a bit of vignetting, so I'm going to use and get the size up, and then we are going to feather it. We just want a very basic fall off. We don't want to draw too much attention to it. We don't want it to feel like it's her face floating in a black void. So overall, I really like where we're at right now with the color that we're finding. Now we're gonna do a couple of different things to enhance it. So we're gonna go into the curves, and we're going to go to the hue versus saturation. So we're gonna choose green. There's not a lot of green in this image besides our main character here. So as we bump the green, it will be pretty prominent what that does. And then we are going to go into the hue versus luminancy. We're going to choose green as well. We really want her face to pop. So we're going to go up. We're going to raise that quite a bit. Now, it doesn't seem like it's doing a lot when you're just working with these pieces individually, but all put together, it really makes that face pop. And then we can also do the same thing for the tie, because the red and green complement each other. The tie is already quite saturated, and you can see we can really mess it up if we go too far. So this is just barely want to kiss that, but you can see how much of a difference that makes. These two nodes to me are what take a normal image into special territory. I really like it. And I'm curious to see how it's going to look on the next shot. If we just take the exact same grade, we paste attributes, boom. See how well this plays off of each other. The thing that I really like about this program is you're not working with weird conversion LUTs. You're not trying to apply too many changes to the actual log image before converting it. You are using the camera's data and known gamut ratio to pull it into a space that you can manipulate it. And between shots, the same thing will apply because the camera doesn't change, the lens doesn't change, we're in the same spot. Even though it's drastically different lighting, it actually looks the way it's supposed to look. You know, this doesn't look unnatural. And then it whips around. This doesn't look unnatural either. But on the day, I can tell you, this light over here behind this gentleman was warm, and it looks warm in the image, but it feels of the same universe, which is the thing that makes it really interesting. We're gonna whip around and everybody's like surprised. Before we get to the end of the music video and ultimately create our second look for this piece, be sure to subscribe if you like this content. We do videos like this all the time, talking about the video making process and different filmmaking tools that you can have, and Dehancer is certainly one of them. So anyway, we end up with our characters playing a show for a bunch of people, and this is the happy part of the piece. You know, it helps that it was filmed at golden hour, so we're gonna have a lot of natural warm light to play with. And honestly, it would be very hard to shift this any other direction, but it fits the tone, which is great. So we're gonna take a look of our main character right here, and we are going, what a face. What a face, so great. We're gonna make a look that kind of reflects this, right? So again, leaning on warm tones. It's a good thing it was filmed at sunset. You know, we're gonna have a lot of warm tones to work with anyway, so we're gonna apply Dehancer. We're gonna do exactly what we did last time. It's gonna look super wonky. You're gonna get a white balance on the shirt. And when you're getting white balance, you really wanna make sure that your RGB right here is as close to 149 on everything or 150 as you can get, because that's the value for white. It's just 151 all across the board, but this is pretty close, marginal. It's the same camera shooting on the A7S III, and we're shooting on the Cine. You do have a lot of options when it comes to film stocks you can work with. Some of them are out of, have expired, they've been discontinued, they're scanned to different sensitivities across the board. There's some really interesting looks you can get through this, and it's amazing. It's all categorized and like so easy to work with, as opposed to working conversion LUTs, and depending on if you shoot on different cameras or whatnot, you can take all your cameras that you shoot with, if you're shooting with a Nikon or a Sony or a Canon, you can put this program on it and it can convert it into the same wave space. You're gonna have to do some adjusting to make it all match, but honestly, not nearly as much as you would have in the pre-Dehancer days. We kind of chose a middle of the road stock for this, and it's called the Kodak Ultramax 400, which sounds far more intense than it is. But we're gonna have some issues though, because yellow and green and red and blue don't like each other, right? So we end up in weird situations. So we're gonna do something here in a second that's gonna help us not make it look like trash. And for our film grain, I really want something that is tight. This is the cleanest the image is gonna look. So I'm gonna choose 65 millimeter at ISO 50, and you can see it's like barely doing anything. It definitely makes the highlights a little softer, but we are going to drop it even more. I really don't want it to be distracting. I want it to feel very organic. Now we get to do the fun stuff, in my opinion. We're gonna enable halation. That's gonna warm up these highlights, especially up by the tree, behind the hair, all those things that approach 100 on the light scale definitely get a little warmer around the edges. And then we are gonna add the bloom. And the bloom to me is really the thing that makes a huge difference in how the whole scene feels. I did actually shift the bloom back to 16 millimeter. And if you use the mask mode, you can kind of see what it's affecting, because it's a smaller amount of bloom, so it's easier to pour it on and make an interesting look. I think somewhere around 30 feels good. It's definitely doing a lot for the image, which is cool. And there we go. So that's the dehancer aspect of it. Now we get to do some curves jazz. One of the color things that I want to do, and I'm actually going to go to the pre node before dehancer, is we're going to add a little bit of color into the shadows now, but we're going to pull a little bit of blue into the image, and then we are going to balance it out by adding a tiny bit of orange and yellow in the highlights. It doesn't do a whole lot, but it does enough to kind of warm the whole thing up without getting too specific. Now we get to go in and do some really important things. So hue versus hue it's kind of dodgy sometimes. Like if you don't do it very minutely, the color will break apart, and we really don't want that. But we do want this green to fit more into the palette of this yellow we have back here. You can see all this grass is very yellow. The trees are yellow, this is yellow. Like, it's a very yellow image. So the complementary color to yellow is blue. So we're gonna take the green, and we're gonna expand it a little bit, like we always do. And we're going to shift it just a tiny bit blue. And you can see the difference that it's making on the face. It's just letting it pop out a tiny, tiny bit. It's really not doing too much, but if I pull it way down, you'll see it starts to get kind of in a weird space. You can see what it's affecting there. But we just want to introduce a little bit of blue into the face so that we can make it help it distinguish itself from the warmth that's behind it. And we're going to use hue versus sat. Do this a little bit. We're going to pull the sat up a tiny bit, and then we're going to use hue versus luminancy. I'm going to grab the face, make it a little bit brighter. And all together, those three things help the face pop just a tiny bit more and separate itself from the green of the grass. Then we're going to do the same thing for the tie. Going to go in, we'll do hue versus luminancy first, pull this up a tiny bit. And then we're going to do the same thing, hue versus hue for the tie. And you can see we can pull it all the way down to green. That would be pretty wacky. But if we pull it a tiny bit towards purple, it does pop off the white shirt a tiny bit more, because now the white shirt has a little bit of yellow in it. And so the more blue the stuff is going to pop off. And you can see how much it does right there to help it pop off the screen. So again, this is just the dehancer plugin right here. And we have our white balance and a little bit of color shifting. And then we have our curves adjustments, which again, we're not trying to make big sweeping changes, because that's when the image starts to break apart. It's about building on top of each piece, and that's part of how you tell a story. You go from a place like this where the world is dark and dreary and definitely macabre and kind of neon, and then you go to a place that's nice, warm, and friendly, and that completes the story. And that's really where you can use color to dictate how the image feels, right? You don't just have to rely on the Rec 709 LUT or the conversion LUT that's in DaVinci. Grading this music video was a lot of fun, and really the process of taking color to tell a story is so important in your filmmaking journey. And these are tools and applications that you can use in any program, right? You don't have to have dehancer, but dehancer makes a lot of it a lot easier. But the camera, the lens, the color, the costume design, obviously there's great production design in this video. It all contributes to an experience for the viewer. And the color is supposed to support that vision. You don't want to do something crazy and make it black and white when it's not supposed to be. You don't want to put weird filters all over it. If you have a decent camera, like an A7S III and a decent lens, you can really do a lot with the image to communicate your story through the color. Thanks for watching, and again, we have a link in the description for 10% off Dehancer if you want to try it today and try it out for yourself. And again, subscribe to the channel because we do videos like this all the time. And yeah, see you next time.